It wasn't empty, not truly, because amidst the dust and decay of St. Jude's Asylum, an old ledger was found, handwritten, detailing the final, agonizing days of one of America's most enigmatic figures, a man whose medical theories, once dismissed as madness, now seemed tragically prescient. The year was 1978. St. Jude's had stood for 80 years, a hulking, Gothic silhouette against the Ohio skyline, its red brick facade crumbling, its slate roof pocked by decades of storms. For generations, it had been a place of shadows and secrets, housing those society deemed broken, dangerous, or merely inconvenient. Now, its time was up. Urban renewal, they called it. A new shopping mall was planned for the site. The order came down: evacuate everything, then demolish. But what does everything truly mean in a place that has held so much human suffering, so many shattered lives? The crew worked methodically, stripping the building, room by room, of its forgotten contents. Beds, rusted and stained, were hauled out. Cabinets, splintered and empty, followed. They tore down walls, ripped up floorboards, exposing the raw skeleton of the institution. And then, in a hidden cavity behind a loose stone in what was once the infirmary's dispensary, a small, leather-bound book emerged, coated in a century of dust. This wasn't just any old book. Its pages were brittle, its ink faded, but the elegant, precise script inside was unmistakable to anyone who knew the history of American psychology. It was the private journal, the daily log, of none other than Dr. Elias Thorne. A name that, even in 1978, still whispered through academic corridors, more often in derision than respect. Thorne, the man who dared to challenge the very foundations of consciousness, whose revolutionary ideas on subconscious resonance were deemed so outlandish, so dangerous, that they ultimately cost him everything, including his freedom. He died within these walls, not as a pioneering physician, but as a patient, silenced and forgotten. Dr. Elias Thorne had been a towering intellect of the late 19th century, a man of fierce conviction and unsettling foresight. He believed the human mind was not a singular, isolated entity, but a complex, resonant field, deeply interconnected with the collective experiences of others. He posited that trauma, especially, could leave an indelible echo in this field, affecting not just the individual, but generations, even the very fabric of a place. His colleagues, entrenched in their nascent understanding of biology and observable pathology, dismissed his theories as mystical, unscientific, bordering on spiritualism. He wasn't talking about ghosts in the traditional sense, but about residual psychic energy, a lingering imprint. He argued that hospitals, especially those dealing with profound suffering, would become saturated with these echoes, like old phonograph records continually replaying a silent, tragic melody. It was this radical thinking, combined with his increasingly erratic behavior under the strain of constant ridicule, that led to his downfall. He wasn't just observing, he claimed to feel these echoes, to be overwhelmed by them, describing a constant cacophony of unseen suffering. His peers, concerned less with his theories and more with his perceived instability, eventually moved for his institutionalization. The irony, of course, was that he was admitted to St. Jude's, an asylum he himself had helped design, advocating for humane treatment and radical new therapies. He became a prisoner in his own progressive vision, the very place he believed collected psychic residues now holding him captive, ostensibly for his own good. His room was on the 3rd floor, a small cell with a single barred window overlooking the overgrown grounds. The ledger, discovered decades later, began to tell the story of those final, harrowing years. Entries detailing his observations of other patients, his continued attempts to theorize from within the cage of his confinement, but increasingly, descriptions of his own internal dissent. He wrote of the oppressive silence punctuated by distant screams, the cloying smell of Lysol and despair that permeated every stone. He meticulously cataloged the patterns of light and shadow on his wall, the rhythmic drip of a leaky faucet somewhere down the hall. Every sensory input becoming amplified, sharpened by his isolation. This wasn't merely a doctor's log, it was a testament to the slow unraveling of a brilliant mind, seen through its own eyes. The conflict he faced wasn't just his physical confinement, but the intellectual one. Here he was, in the very heart of the resonant field he theorized, experiencing its full, unfiltered force, yet unable to communicate his findings. He was dismissed as delusional, his insights relegated to the ravings of a madman. The stakes were immense, his reputation, his legacy, perhaps even the future understanding of the human psyche. What if he was right all along? What if he was experiencing exactly what he had theorized, but the world was simply unready to hear it? His entries showed a desperate man trying to maintain his scientific rigor even as his own sanity fractured under the relentless pressure of his environment and his perceived mission. Do you ever wonder what truths are stifled, not by conspiracy, but by simple incredulity? By the inability of a generation to grasp a concept that's just too far ahead of its time? What if Thorne's madness was merely an intense, unfiltered sensitivity to something real, something we still barely understand? The ledger became a window into that experience. He wrote of waking up feeling the exact despair of a woman who had died in the room next to his decades prior, of the echoing laughter of forgotten children in the asylum courtyard, of a persistent low-frequency hum that he believed was the collective anxiety of every soul who had ever suffered within St. Jude's walls. These weren't just hallucinations to him, they were data points proving his grand theory of interconnected consciousness. The entries grew more frantic, less coherent towards the end, but one pattern emerged with stark clarity: his obsession with a particular section of the infirmary, the very area where the ledger was eventually discovered. He believed it was a focal point, a node of resonance where the echoes were strongest. He described furtive attempts to smuggle out notes, to leave behind some trace of his final profound understanding, a warning, or perhaps a confirmation. He hinted at a specific device or record that could, if found, validate his life's work. The ledger wasn't just a diary, it was a map, a scavenger hunt for a truth that he was desperately trying to ensure survived him. The midpoint twist came in a series of cryptic marginalia. Scrawled alongside increasingly illegible script were precise architectural diagrams, floor plans of the infirmary section, with a small X marking the spot behind the loose stone. It wasn't just a general belief about a node. He had actively hidden something, a final testament, a physical piece of evidence meant to be found. This wasn't the rambling of a lunatic. It was the calculated act of a man desperately fighting for his legacy, even from beyond the grave. The crew evacuating St. Jude's that day in 1978 had nearly missed it, nearly tossed the entire section of wall into a skip, obliterating Thorne's final message forever. Imagine the razor-thin margin between discovery and utter oblivion. The final days recorded in the ledger were a descent into fevered lucidity. Thorne was convinced he was nearing a breakthrough, not in his illness, but in his understanding of the echoes. He described feeling the boundaries of his own consciousness dissolving, merging with the collective psychic field of the asylum. He wrote of a profound sense of peace alternating with terrifying moments of being overwhelmed by the weight of all past sorrows. His last entry, barely a whisper of ink, read, "The separation. It was the illusion. The true state is connection. I am not empty." Then, a single final stroke, a wavering line that trailed off the page as if his hand had fallen mid-sentence. That was the moment. He died in his bed, unattended, sometime in the early hours of November 12, 1904. The ledger, hidden within the walls, would silently keep his secret for over 7 decades. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac failure, a clinical, impersonal end to a life that had been anything but. No one truly mourned him, certainly not as a genius. He was just another unfortunate soul lost to the labyrinthine corridors of St. Jude's, another failure of the burgeoning medical science of the time. The building was emptied, his room cleared, but his final desperate attempt to communicate remained, a silent sentinel waiting for the right moment to be heard. The discovery of Thorne's ledger wasn't just about a forgotten doctor. It was about reevaluating the very nature of human experience and the limits of scientific understanding. The man who was once scoffed at was now seen in a different light. Historians and psychologists began to re-examine his early papers, finding in them uncanny parallels to modern theories of collective unconscious, epigenetic trauma, and even quantum entanglement in consciousness studies. The echoes he spoke of, once dismissed as delusions, now resonated with new findings. The old asylum, far from being truly empty, had held a profound secret, a buried truth that only its demolition could bring to light. This finding forced a re-evaluation of not just Thorne's life, but of the entire era of early psychiatric care. How many other brilliant, sensitive individuals were institutionalized, their insights dismissed as symptoms of their illness? What knowledge was lost because it didn't fit the prevailing scientific paradigm? The ledger became a symbol of the untold stories locked away in such institutions, the voices silenced, the perspectives ignored. It challenged the very definition of madness and prompted a re-examination of how society treats those who see the world differently, especially those who claim to perceive realities beyond the scope of conventional understanding. If stories like Dr. Thorne's, plucked from the jaws of oblivion, stir something within you, then consider subscribing to How They Died. We excavate these hidden histories, one forgotten life at a time, to understand the true complexities of the human journey. The long-term impact of Thorne's discovery extended far beyond academia. It spurred a new wave of interest in parapsychology and transpersonal psychology, lending a historical legitimacy to concepts that had long been relegated to the fringe. Architects and urban planners began to consider the psychological residue of old buildings, particularly those with a history of trauma, asking if mere demolition truly erased all traces. And for those of us who stand in the remnants of such places, knowing a story like Thorne's, it changes everything. We no longer see just decaying brick and shattered glass. We feel a weight, an undeniable presence. É frio palpável que nada tem a ver com o ar exterior. Sussurro que ecoa nos corredores silenciosos, mesmo quando ninguém está falando. Uma profunda sensação de tristeza que parece emanar das próprias paredes, embebida na argamassa e na pedra como uma mancha antiga. Este não é o medo supersticioso de fantasmas, mas a compreensão visceral de que a energia humana, a emoção bruta liberada em momentos de desespero, alegria, dor ou até mesmo epifania, não simplesmente desaparece. Ela se prende, ela impregna.
Eu acredito, e muitos que estiveram nesses lugares concordam, que a arquitetura não é apenas um recipiente inerte, é um condutor, um gravador silencioso. Cada arranhão no piso, cada lasca de tinta descascada, cada porta rangendo conta uma parte de uma história muito maior do que nós. Quando a doutora Thorne começou a registrar essas anomalias, classificando-as não como fantasmas, mas como ressonâncias psíquicas, ela abriu uma porta que muitos estavam aterrorizados demais para sequer tocar. Ela sugeriu que, talvez, o que percebemos como assombrações não sejam almas desencarnadas a passear, mas sim ecos eletromagnéticos de experiências passadas, uma espécie de memória ambiental que nossos cérebros, por vezes, conseguem sintonizar. Pense por um momento em um ambiente de hospital psiquiátrico de antigamente. Estamos a falar de gritos contidos, de tratamentos que hoje nos parecem bárbaros, de mentes brilhantes aprisionadas por diagnósticos que eram, na melhor das hipóteses, incompletos e, na pior, pura ignorância. Estamos a falar de sonhos roubados, de identidades desfeitas, de esperanças esmagadas contra a frieza de uma parede de pedra. Agora, imagine essa carga emocional, essa densidade de vida e sofrimento acumulando-se por décadas, séculos, sem nunca ser verdadeiramente dissipada. A demolição pode remover o material físico, mas será que realmente pode apagar essa assinatura energética? É uma pergunta que continua a me intrigar. Se você já se viu em um lugar antigo, sentindo aquele arrepio inexplicável na nuca, ou uma melancolia súbita que não é sua, talvez você também já tenha sentido essa ressonância psíquica. O que te fez sentir assim? Partilhe sua experiência nos comentários abaixo. Essa ideia é algo que desafia nossa compreensão materialista do mundo. Se a consciência não é apenas um subproduto do cérebro, se é uma força mais fundamental, então talvez ela possa interagir com o ambiente de maneiras que ainda estamos a começar a entender. Os experimentos de Thorne, que ela detalhou meticulosamente em seus livros ocultos, esses mesmos livros que quase foram perdidos para sempre, incluíam dispositivos rudimentares, mas surpreendentemente eficazes, para medir essas emanações. Ela falava de campos de estresse emocional que podiam ser detectados por alterações sutis na temperatura, nas ondas eletromagnéticas e até mesmo, de forma mais controversa, na sensibilidade de certos indivíduos. Os críticos de Thorne ridicularizavam essas noções como pseudociência, histeria ou o próprio delírio que ela jurava estar a investigar. Mas, como agora sabemos, o diário e as anotações dela revelaram uma mente tão lógica e metódica quanto qualquer cientista da sua época. O problema não era a falta de rigor, mas a ousadia de suas conclusões, que desafiavam o paradigma dominante. Ela estava essencialmente a perguntar: e se a loucura não for apenas um defeito interno, mas também uma reação a um ambiente que por si só está doente ou saturado de uma carga invisível? E se algumas das vozes que os pacientes ouviam não fossem meras alucinações, mas ecos distorcidos de vozes reais de quem viveu e sofreu naquelas mesmas paredes? Para aqueles que herdaram o fardo de limpar e demolir esses hospitais, a realidade é muitas vezes mais crua do que qualquer teoria. Eu converso com muitos desses trabalhadores. Eles são pragmáticos, focados em betão e aço, mas até mesmo os mais céticos entre eles admitem ter visto ou sentido coisas inexplicáveis. Um capataz de demolição uma vez me contou sobre um colega que se recusou a entrar em uma ala específica de um sanatório abandonado no interior. Não era medo de desabamento ou de doenças, mas de algo indescritível que o fazia sentir-se observado e invadido cada vez que se aproximava da entrada. Ele falava de uma tristeza tão densa que parecia querer esmagá-lo, como se o ar por si só estivesse pesado de lágrimas não derramadas. Agora, imagine essa carga emocional, essa densidade de vida e sofrimento acumulando-se por décadas, séculos, sem nunca ser verdadeiramente dissipada. A demolição pode remover o material físico, mas será que realmente pode apagar essa assinatura energética? É uma pergunta que continua a me intrigar. Se você já se viu em um lugar antigo, sentindo aquele arrepio inexplicável na nuca, ou uma melancolia súbita que não é sua, talvez você também já tenha sentido essa ressonância psíquica. O que te fez sentir assim? Partilhe sua experiência nos comentários abaixo. Essa ideia é algo que desafia nossa compreensão materialista do mundo. Se a consciência não é apenas um subproduto do cérebro, se é uma força mais fundamental, então talvez ela possa interagir com o ambiente de maneiras que ainda estamos a começar a entender. Os experimentos de Thorne, que ela detalhou meticulosamente em seus livros ocultos, esses mesmos livros que quase foram perdidos para sempre, incluíam dispositivos rudimentares, mas surpreendentemente eficazes, para medir essas emanações. Ela falava de campos de estresse emocional que podiam ser detectados por alterações sutis na temperatura, nas ondas eletromagnéticas e até mesmo, de forma mais controversa, na sensibilidade de certos indivíduos. Os críticos de Thorne ridicularizavam essas noções como pseudociência, histeria ou o próprio delírio que ela jurava estar a investigar.
Mas, como agora sabemos, o diário e as anotações dela revelaram uma mente tão lógica e metódica quanto qualquer cientista da sua época. O problema não era a falta de rigor, mas a ousadia de suas conclusões, que desafiavam o paradigma dominante. Ela estava essencialmente a perguntar: e se a loucura não for apenas um defeito interno, mas também uma reação a um ambiente que por si só está doente ou saturado de uma carga invisível? E se algumas das vozes que os pacientes ouviam não fossem meras alucinações, mas ecos distorcidos de vozes reais de quem viveu e sofreu naquelas mesmas paredes? Para aqueles que herdaram o fardo de limpar e demolir esses hospitais, a realidade é muitas vezes mais crua do que qualquer teoria. Eu converso com muitos desses trabalhadores. Eles são pragmáticos, focados em betão e aço, mas até mesmo os mais céticos entre eles admitem ter visto ou sentido coisas inexplicáveis. Um capataz de demolição uma vez me contou sobre um colega que se recusou a entrar em uma ala específica de um sanatório abandonado no interior. Não era medo de desabamento ou de doenças, mas de algo indescritível que o fazia sentir-se observado e invadido cada vez que se aproximava da entrada. Ele falava de uma tristeza tão densa que parecia querer esmagá-lo, como se o ar por si só estivesse pesado de lágrimas não derramadas.
Ele, um homem que não temia explosivos ou estruturas instáveis, estava paralisado por uma atmosfera, uma presença que não conseguia ignorar. O que se faz com uma presença assim? Como se demole o indetectável? É como tentar esvaziar um balde de memórias. As escavadoras podem derrubar paredes, os martelos podem quebrar pisos, mas a aura de um lugar, essa teia invisível de experiências e sofrimentos, parece resistir e talvez, no fundo, seja um lembrete importante. Um lembrete de que as histórias dos que foram esquecidos merecem um olhar mais atento, um reconhecimento que vai além da lápide ou da falta dela. Porque cada vida importa, e a forma como termina, ou como é vivida, deixa uma marca. Se você se sente compelido a investigar essas marcas, a desvendar esses mistérios da história e da experiência humana que ecoam através do tempo, considere subscrever o How They Bite. Nós mergulhamos nas profundezas desses momentos, tentando entender o que a vida e a morte realmente significam para cada um de nós. A reurbanização e a demolição são vistas como atos de progresso, a erradicação de ruínas que nos lembram de épocas menos iluminadas. Mas se essas ruínas mantêm uma forma de memória, então o que estamos a apagar? Estamos a obliterar testemunhas silenciosas de um passado que, embora doloroso, é vital para a nossa compreensão do presente. Não é apenas a perda de uma estrutura física, mas potencialmente a interrupção de um elo com uma verdade mais profunda, uma compreensão sobre a natureza da consciência e da persistência da emoção. É por isso que o trabalho de Thorne, antes marginalizado, agora ressoa com uma urgência renovada. Ela nos advertiu que, ao desconsiderarmos esses fenômenos, não estamos apenas a ignorar o inexplicável, estamos a ignorar uma parte integral da experiência humana e, talvez, a empobrecer a nossa própria percepção da realidade. As paredes desses antigos hospitais, por mais desoladas que pareçam, guardam um arquivo de vozes, de sussurros e de silêncios que deveríamos aprender a ouvir. Não com os ouvidos literais, mas com uma abertura de espírito que nos permita questionar o que é real e o que não é. Quem sabe que outros segredos, que outras revelações ainda estão à espera de serem descobertos nesses edifícios que pensávamos estar vazios? A história nos ensina repetidamente que aquilo que descartamos como loucura ou fantasia muitas vezes guarda as chaves para futuras compreensões. A verdade, como a própria vida, encontra maneiras de persistir, mesmo quando tentamos varrê-la para debaixo do tapete da conveniência ou do ceticismo. E quando ficamos de pé entre os escombros, o vento sibilando pelas janelas vazias, o que sentimos não é apenas o eco de vidas passadas, mas o peso da nossa própria ignorância diante de um mistério que talvez nunca seja totalmente desvendado. Um silêncio que grita, uma presença invisível que se recusa a ser esquecida, desafiando a lógica do nosso mundo. O que mais esses corredores podem nos sussurrar? This discovery forces us to ask, what other truths lie buried, just waiting for the right moment, the right set of hands to bring them to light?
Perhaps there's a story you know that deserves to be told. If so, let it be heard. And if this narrative moved you, a simple like goes a long way in ensuring these echoes of the past aren't silenced again. St. Jude's Asylum was eventually demolished. The shopping mall rose in its place, a gleaming monument to consumerism. But for those who know the story of Dr. Elias Thorne and the ledger found nestled in its forgotten walls, the ground beneath that mall is not truly empty. It vibrates with the echoes of his final terrifying insights, a reminder that some presences linger not as specters but as indelible marks on the tapestry of human history. This discovery forces us to ask, what other truths lie buried, just waiting for the right moment, the right set of hands to bring them to light? Perhaps there's a story you know that deserves to be told. If so, let it be heard. And if this narrative moved you, a simple like goes a long way in ensuring these echoes of the past aren't silenced again. St. Jude's Asylum was eventually demolished. The shopping mall rose in its place, a gleaming monument to consumerism. But for those who know the story of Dr. Elias Thorne and the ledger found nestled in its forgotten walls, the ground beneath that mall is not truly empty. It vibrates with the echoes of his final terrifying insights, a reminder that some presences linger not as specters but as indelible marks on the tapestry of human history. This discovery forces us to ask, what other truths lie buried, just waiting for the right moment, the right set of hands to bring them to light? Perhaps there's a story you know that deserves to be told. If so, let it be heard. And if this narrative moved you, a simple like goes a long way in ensuring these echoes of the past aren't silenced again. St. Jude's Asylum was eventually demolished. The shopping mall rose in its place, a gleaming monument to consumerism. But for those who know the story of Dr. Elias Thorne and the ledger found nestled in its forgotten walls, the ground beneath that mall is not truly empty. It vibrates with the echoes of his final terrifying insights, a reminder that some presences linger not as specters but as indelible marks on the tapestry of human history.
The evacuation had physically emptied the building, but it merely revealed the depths of its true, unspoken fullness. Dr. Thorne died alone, misunderstood, but his final message survived, a testament to a truth he believed in more than life itself. A truth that, perhaps, we are only now beginning to comprehend.